Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Dr. Anthony Chow. I'm the director of the San Jose State University School of Information, and I want to welcome you to today's symposium. Thank you for joining us of our celebration and recognition of deaf culture and history. Feel free to drop into the chat your name, your organizational affiliation, position, and where you're joining us from today. It's always interesting to see the diversity of the attendees. The theme of our symposium is Best Practices and Lessons Learned Supporting Deaf Communities. And this is our second annual symposium honoring the deaf community, and it's part of our larger EDI series sponsored by the iSchool. And if afraid if you could drop the agenda into the chat there. Started in 1997 by the National Association of the Deaf, NAD, National Deaf History Month was recognized from March 13th through April 15th in recognition of local community members who were deaf, hard of hearing, or experiencing hearing loss, while also highlighting the importance of inclusivity and equitable accessibility. I'm also excited to share that as of 2022, the San Jose State iSchool is the most diverse program in the nation and is #1 in total number of students and overall national percentages in all racial categories. #1 for Hispanic Latino students, #1 for Black African American students, #1 for Asian Pacific Islander Native Hawaiian students, #1 for Native American Native Alaskan students, and even #1 for white students at 11% of all students nationally. So what this means is that I share with great optimism that today marks yet another opportunity to educate the most diverse student body in the nation, if not the world. Our EDI series is focused on understanding one another through the voices and beautiful diversity of our society and the different perspectives and lived experiences that are represented through them. I'm sincerely grateful to all of you in attendance and our distinguished guests with us today. Also, special thanks to Dr. Mary Boland and the iSchool Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Accessibility Committee for organizing today's event. Now, let's introduce our ASL interpreters from the Partners in Communication Agency, Sheila Brager Hall and Sharon Newman Solo. Just wanted to give you guys a shout out. Thank you so much. And today we'll begin with a keynote address followed by question and answer period, and then a panel discussion around best practices for library services to the deaf community. During the proceedings, please use the Q&A section so that all panelists can see the questions, and also feel free to comment in the chat section, which will remain open throughout today's proceedings. The entire day will be recorded, transcribed, and posted on our website within our iLibrary in approximately 2 weeks. And again, afraid if you could drop in our EDI link, iLibrary, and also the Deaf History and Heritage link as well. Now, I'd like to introduce you to our keynote speaker, Dr. Rhonda Jennings-Array, who is an assistant professor with the University of Virginia, specializing in American Sign Language. Rhonda, welcome.
When we look at deaf culture and deaf history, we want to look at it with respect, and we have been for quite a while. So what I'd like to do is give you a disclaimer. I'm not a person who kind of, lets people know they're not doing things right. What I do is tell you about me and my journey. And I don't talk about anybody else or their thoughts or what they would like to tell you. And then at the end, I'll wrap up with a few things like tips, some advice, different types of wrap-up things. But mostly it's going to be all, it's going to be me speaking and you're getting my view. Now, interpreter, if you're having a difficulty with me going too fast, just let me know. All right, great. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start. All right, so I am Dr. Mary Boland, and I have known each other for quite a long time, before COVID. And so she asked me to come here and give the keynote, and I was trying to figure out what I was going to talk about. And she explained that maybe I could explain about my background, because I told her in the past that, there are things that I remember from my whole life. And so I was thinking, okay, what should I say? So I'm going to expand a little bit on some things, and then I'll really expand, and then we'll do a wrap up. So let me start with my education, my educational journey. Before I went into Deaf Ed, I majored in food and nutrition. And my goal was to work as a food scientist. But in the year 1989, that was the year before the ADA was passed, it just so happened that I had graduated, and I reached out to apply to many different places, and they said, no, a deaf person can't do this. So that was surprising to me and kind of a revelation. But that time it was 1989. So I wasn't sure how I could fight this. But they told me directly, being deaf, we don't think you can. And so it was a blatant form of discrimination, very obvious. Today, it's a different kind of discrimination. It's more hidden. More like people cover it up and say, well, you're not really qualified. But anyway, when this happened, I started thinking, now what? So what am I going to do? So then I decided. I was a business assistant for the Kendall Demonstration School in Washington, D.C. And that's under Gallaudet University. Gallaudet University has two different schools for K through 12 on one campus, and it's signed like this. It's Kendall Demonstration School. And then the other is MSSD. And so I was the bus assistant. So I helped students with their transportation. I helped them with their homework. So I thought, well, why don't I just try and get into Deaf Ed? Let's see if I can do that. So that's where it started. I went on into Deaf Ed, got my master's, went to Gallaudet, and I focused on the elementary level. And obviously the reason why is because, my undergraduate was in nutrition. So I was thinking, maybe I would work with history or science or something like that. So we could have a secondary school, but at that time, that was not so true. So with elementary, it was, I could teach a wide variety of subjects. And so I was fine with that. I wanted the little ones rather than the high school students, but later I did go into high school teaching. So I went through with my elementary level training, got my diploma, started working, and felt that, or my degree rather, and then I started feeling like, might be time for me to move on to a different state. Now, this was Maryland that I was in. I wanted to move, so I went back home to Virginia. So this is my alma mater. The Virginia School for the Deaf is here. And so I came back to my alma mater and started teaching high school. And my goodness, a lot of the deaf students were struggling to read and write. Now, I already knew that was true, but at the high school level, that's where I was teaching English, and it was a revelation to me. I was wondering, how can I help these students with reading? And I decided to go back to school. So I went back to get a post-secondary certificate, or more like a post-grad certificate. So it took 3 summers, and I was a lit major. And so the reason I wasn't a reading specialist is because writing was included in the focus for deaf kids only. So this was a lit specialist. So I decided to go ahead and learn that. And so I had more of a clinical mindset. I was a teacher, but the clinical mindset is different. So I started trying to help the kids to learning how to read and write. And then after that, I started thinking, okay, it's time for me to move up into some sort of management position, maybe assistant principal or something along that line. So back to school I went. First to Gallaudet, and then to McDaniel College in Maryland. And then the third was in Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, or Columbia, Maryland. So I went ahead and learned what I needed to learn. I got my license in admin, and then I started focusing on special ed. Deaf education typically is included within special ed. In most places where they do not have a majority of deaf people, they will say that they are special ed students. So I got this, and then I moved on, and then I was responsible for accreditation of schools and many other things. But I never was able to move up. It was a struggle for me to promote because the administrators were all hearing. And their thinking was, I've known you for many years. I think you'll fit in these other positions, different ones, like ASL specialist. And ASL specialist wasn't what I wanted. So I was wondering, why were they telling me that? I wanted to move up and get the experience in administration. It was very frustrating. So I decided to leave. So then that's where I began my journey into teaching in college. Yeah, I missed teaching deaf kids, true, but nevertheless, let me back up. So I taught high school English, and then later the ASL teacher retired and they asked me to teach ASL. I went, hey, that wasn't my field. So I thought, what am I going to do? And I decided to go back to school again. So this is my second master's, and this is in teaching sign language. Now they call it sign language education. It's MASLED. So it sounds like MA SLED, but it sounds funny. But anyway, MASLE. So I moved on from there, and now I felt like, okay, I was qualified to teach. Now, while I was getting my master's, at the same time, I got my PhD. And I was aware that I was in the process of leaving the school, and I wanted to teach at the university level. And what would I teach? So I decided it'd be better to get a PhD. And I got my PhD in post-secondary and adult ed in Capella University. And that was 100% online. Their library was fully online. You couldn't even go anywhere to get a book. You know how that goes. So that was my educational background. But while I was learning all the things that I was learning and starting to teach, I was tutoring as well. As a food nutritionist, I was tutoring in food nutrition, and a lot of students were struggling with nutrition. It involved a lot of scientific terminology, and so they had a difficult time with that. It was a big struggle. So that, when I was teaching that, it began my teaching journey. And of course, at this time, I was tutoring my peers. We were pretty much the same age. At the same time, I was teaching cooking to kids who had deaf parents, CODA kids. So CODA means children of deaf adults. And there was a mixture of CODAs and deaf kids at Gallaudet. So I was teaching all of them. And finally, I was able to get an internship in student teaching at the Maryland School for the Deaf in Frederick. So I went to medical school, but I didn't like medical school. So that was an understanding for me. It was a different age, different types of thinking. So then I went to Capella. And this was what I wanted. So elementary school, I decided that's what I wanted, started teaching first grade, moved here to Virginia. Now the Kendall School for the Deaf, I taught there during summer school. Virginia School for the Deaf, though, is where I have worked the longest, and I've had the most responsibility. Like I was coach, I was responsible for teachers who were struggling in their sign language skills. They had to pass a certain level of sign language skill. So they had to meet this advanced level, and they were struggling with it. So I was helping them by providing them courses, going into their classrooms and providing support there, doing some language training. So that was a lot more responsibility that I had there at the School for the Deaf in Virginia. So this is my teaching experience. And there's a point to this. You might be wondering why I'm talking about my teaching. So my very first university experience was at Towne State at the time. It's called TU now, but TSU now. And then I was at McDaniel, where I got my lit major, and I taught there. And then I went to the University of Virginia part-time at first. That's about, I would say, 12 years ago that I was part-time, or 12 years total that I was part-time. Then I went to Piedmont, Virginia Community College, PVCC, and then Blue Ridge, and then Joss Reynolds. And so you can see all the different places here. It's all listed. And they are all part of the Virginia University system. I taught different courses in each of them, though. Now, Radford University had a deaf ed program there, and then also the University of Louisville. And this is where I started working full-time getting my full-time university experience was in Louisville. And then part-time at Gallaudet, and that's where I met Mary Bowen. And then now I teach at the University of Virginia. So let's take a look at the courses that I've taught. You can see them listed here. Most of them are American Sign Language. Now, when I began at Townsend, TSU, I started teaching ASL, I absolutely hated it. It was a struggle for me. These were freshmen that were coming in, and it was a requirement that they take either a sign language course, not ASL at that time, was called Basic Sign Language, either take that, sign language, or public speaking. And most students flocked to my course because they thought it'd be easier. So I was in a huge lecture hall. And there was no personal relationship with any of the students. It was too hard with so many students in that lecture hall. And that experience was not good. After a year, I thought, okay, no, I'm done. So I quit for a while until I went to McDaniel. Now, my big goal was to train in deaf ed, focus on lit, focus on deaf kids. That was what I wanted to do. That was my field. And American Sign Language, okay, that was my language, but was that my future career? I didn't think so. I thought it was in education of deaf children. So I trained as a teacher to become a teacher for the deaf. But that didn't happen. At McDaniel, I taught graduate students. And these people were future teachers of the deaf. And that was the only time I was able to check off one of my check boxes and say that I really enjoyed that. That was in the summer, and I enjoyed teaching those students very much. But after that, it was all ASL. So what I taught was ASL until finally interpreting came along. I am a certified deaf interpreter. And if you might be wondering what that is, how do you become a deaf certified interpreter? If you watch TV now, you see deaf interpreters being spotlighted. So they are language mediators. And so what happens is that you work with a hearing interpreter who feeds the information to the deaf interpreter, and then we pass it along. So I was able to teach interpreting students, but there was still an issue with it being ASL, a different kind of ASL. And it was hard, really hard. So moving along, I went to another community college, same thing. I taught more of like history and culture of deaf people. I enjoyed that. And then comparative linguistics, I truly enjoyed. So ASL linguistics is very enjoyable for me, but it was still ASL. Now at the University of Louisville, this was my first full-time teaching position. All the others were adjunct. So moving along, they hired me as an ASL professor, but it just so happened they came to the realization that they needed for me to teach some interpreting students. So I went back and forth. I taught in the interpreting department as well as the ASL department, and I moved in both places. So I got the job at the University of Virginia, moved there, and started teaching there full-time. And while I was at Virginia, I went ahead and part-time for pleasure, I taught at Gallaudet University. And all of that was teaching online. Other colleges, like the community colleges that are listed here, were mostly online, not simultaneous. There were a few of them that were simultaneous, but not so much. Now, Radford, it was simultaneous, but the students were in a classroom. So there was this huge group of students in a classroom, and then I was the only one on the screen. That was a horrible experience. That was way before COVID, way before Zoom. And so it was really uncomfortable. unwieldy, because having a simultaneous class with me on the screen, it was very difficult. The students were so small, I couldn't even see them. So at the U of Virginia, I was hired as an ASL teacher. That is true. While I was teaching ASL, they asked me. Now, I was required to teach linguistics in the fall. I was okay with that. I really enjoyed it. But in the spring, they were asking me what? What would I want to teach? And it could be anything. They already had a woman in doing gender studies in the deaf world. It was a course called WGBS. And that course was already there. So I thought, well, maybe I would go on and take that on. And that was very enjoyable, very different. My classroom wasn't focused on ASL. It was focused on deaf history and culture related to women and gender issues. And then they asked me, what else would I like to teach? I didn't have to continue with WGS. I could do something else. So I thought, okay, I can do Introduction to Deaf Ed. What else? That was my field, right? So I had been in that field for so many years, I decided to go ahead and teach there. And I did enjoy that. It was different. And the students, or my audience, were people who were minoring in ASL and deaf studies. So that was their minor. We didn't have a major in that. This was their minor, or it might have been other students who were just curious about ASL and wanted to take the course. So we encouraged the education students. There was another school of education. We encouraged them to come and join us as well. My linguistics class, the language majors joined that because, the department chair was very supportive and saying, really, it just depends on who the chair is. That's what I found out, was it depends on who the chair is about whether you get supported or not. And then what you see, what you receive when you are more supported. So while I was going through my journey and getting all that experience, a lot of my experience was at Capella as a student, but as a professor, it was both at Gallaudet and the University of Virginia. So they had very strong libraries that I frequented. For the University of Virginia, they had books and videos related, and I'm talking about deaf studies and deaf related information, cultural history, information, things like that. And so there was a pretty good number of books there. But as far as videos, there were tons of VHS videos. Now, who has VHS players now? Nobody, really. I don't have one. So here we were. We had to, to improve that. There were some DVDs, and you still can get DVD players. Also, in my Mac, I can do it there, but, there was some of that, it was pretty automatic, but we started going to major companies and publishers, like people who publish journals and so on, but they were not all accessible. Some of them I could not access. I still had access to what they had at Gallaudet, so I was moving back and forth to see which publications they had and which were fully accessible to me and which were not, and which I had to pay for and which not. As far as being easy, yeah, it was pretty good. We just had to go to the computer and find it. But the Virginia search engine was a struggle for me. You had to go in so many different places. You had to click and click and click to find the information you needed. And the access to the journals, as I just said, was pretty limited for some. And as far as research journals, not so much. Most of those were at Gallaudet. Because I am deaf, obviously, I needed to have captions, right, for videos. If I wanted to watch any of the videos, I had to have captions. And not all the videos have captions. Now with the ADA, more and more universities are starting to shift to going ahead and making sure that they attach captions. And they don't wait for somebody to go to them and say, I need access to this information. They go ahead and do it in advance. So that's the kind of thing that started to happen, but it's not 100%. This is a slow work in progress. But these are hearing universities.
Okay. We switched the interpreters. So this is at a university for hearing students, but Gallaudet is a university that has the majority of their students are deaf. And so accessibility was not a problem there. And there were just an enormous number of deaf literature, magazines, books. And of course, now they're mostly streamed. When I entered their video library, it's so fantastic because there's so much in ASL. They don't have to be captioned because they're in ASL, many of them. So that makes it so much easier. And why it's easier, I don't know, but each search engine, each system is different. In the journal section, I taught, my teaching was related to deaf stuff, right? So I needed journals that related to that. And I wanted my students to have good journal articles because I did require research papers and essays based on information, peer-reviewed articles, that kind of thing, or whatever. But it wasn't easy to find that at the University of Virginia. However, at Gallaudet, they had more. And they were accessible. But accessibility wasn't, accessibility wasn't an issue, but because videos and so forth that were audio-based had captions and that kind of thing. And I'll talk about those points a little bit more later, but my experience as a full-time instructor or adjunct or professor or whatever using the library, that was what I had the most experience with. Other things I haven't had much of a chance to do. At the University of Louisville, I had a very brief experience. I don't recall what I did with their library and their network. Now, to get to the point, I trained in deaf education. I wanted to teach people to become teachers of the deaf. And my current area of instruction, wait, let me say this differently. Is not teaching people to become educators for deaf children or adults. So what now? I did teach deaf education related to specific courses at both the University of Louisville and the University of Virginia, but my audience was different. They weren't future teachers of the deaf. Maybe one or two went into deaf ed as a major. The other colleges, you saw, everything I taught was ASL over and over again. I have a point, trust me, I'm getting to it. So now, for any library that has deaf people working there, deaf students attending, a program that trains interpreters, deaf education, ASL, anything related to deaf people should have links to journals, magazines, videos, and so forth. And I also know that at hearing universities, they have lots of ASL and deaf people signing on video, lots. Some have more than others, depending on their program. If they have an interpreter training program, perhaps they have more. But for deaf ed, there's just a very tiny number. Education has a segment, special education, right? And the material for that gets narrower and narrower from the broad area of education literature. So special education is a different animal, as it were. Oh, Alfredo, do you want me to stop? No, okay. So I think it's so important for the library to have signed material as well. Captions alone aren't good enough. We need transcripts as well. Transcripts alone are not good enough. We need captions as well. And yes, it's a lot of work. But the reason is because that allows deaf-blind individuals access, because captions are not always user-friendly for the blind. So that's that. Now, for any place, it's important to understand where it's important to understand deaf culture, deaf people, their needs, and to look at deaf people as a linguistic minority rather than a category of disabled people. Because most of the time we look at ourselves with surprise when people say we're disabled, because the only thing we can't do is hear. And see, with an interpreter, I have complete access, as you see right now. And that's all that is required. So I want to create a mindset and a different perspective. I told Dr. Bolin long ago that most hearing universities and colleges tend to hire deaf individuals specifically to teach ASL. And maybe to teach interpreting, but not that much. That's deaf people I'm talking about. Or in deaf ed, I see that there's so many hearing instructors and professors. Not everyone wants ASL. And ASL is a hard field. People think it's easy, but it is not. Now, deaf people, such as myself, have a different way of receiving and maintaining information and expressing information. We need communication. And when we have access to communication, we can have thorough communication. We need visual aids. We're visual learners. We learn by seeing the things around us and such. So when deaf people are studying, majoring in some field, let's say science, and want to work at a college to teach science, let's say once they graduate, the college they're looking at is a regular hearing college, not Gallaudet. There are plenty of deaf people at Gallaudet. I'm talking about a regular university where deaf students are not the major population. Say they want to teach science there. It doesn't happen very often. And deaf people, and the reason is deaf people find that the colleges don't know what to do with them. And not everyone is comfortable with deaf professors or instructors. So this is my experience that I'm talking about. Job opportunities for deaf people are very scarce. We always have to compete. Sometimes the directors will easily choose the hearing person because they can talk to them easily. They can develop a relationship simply. And so they choose them over the deaf person. Qualifications are, of course, important, but this experience of choosing because the person's hearing is too often occurring. And deaf people want to teach other things, like why can't they teach science, psychology, social work, whatever? Why is it always ASL? That limits us. And often deaf people have to uproot and move far away just to work. We can't just work anywhere. For example, I wanted to work in Virginia, so I had to move close by. I couldn't, like our local university was right across the way from me practically, but there was nothing for deaf people there, and there was nothing for us. So I had to go far away, and I had to move closer to do that. So that happens to us a lot. I'm curious if you've heard of Deaf Gain. Deaf Gain. That's an important point that deaf people in your working field, libraries or whatever, anywhere, use. We provide things that you might never have thought of. Deaf Gain is something like the football huddle. You know, the football huddle that is used every day? That was developed by a deaf person. And now every football game you watch, high school, whatever, is always with a huddle. And captions are for access, for deaf people. That's how it developed. But now when it's noisy, like in a bar or you're exercising or something, you can see the captions, and that's deaf gain. We have taught and trained people to think differently. We're more visual, and we are able to apply different strategies and so forth. And that's a huge benefit that's different from the traditional education. I think it's just wonderful to have deaf people working for each of you. And before I started, I told Mary, Dr. Bolin, ASL, it has never been my dream in the first place, but that's where I am now. And that's where most deaf people are. When they go to a hearing university, I'm not talking about Gallaudet, but when they work at any other university, they tend to work almost always in a field related to ASL. So I want you to hold that information related to visual access, signing videos, the library system that's accessible, hiring more deaf people, incorporating more diversity. These are things I would like for you to remember. And that is my take on best practices.
Fantastic, Rhonda. Thank you so much. As a former football player, I will always remember what you shared with us. And it's incredible that things like that are forgotten and not connected to that contribution. So thank you for sharing that. And of course, Deaf Gain. We have a few minutes for questions for the audience. So please, if you have a question for Rhonda, we have just a few more minutes of her valuable time. So please feel free to either take the mic
take
or
the screen share down.
Oh, yes. And there's Rhonda's.
I'll give the PowerPoint to you all as well. There you go.
So feel free to, actually, I don't think you have access to the mic, but feel free to ask a question in chat.
Ask what you'd like to ask. I don't bite. Well, I can't bite, right? I'm only a screen, right?
Yeah, Rhonda, I really appreciate you sharing your story with us too. And I think that creating opportunities for those that use ASL is a really important point, right? To not marginalize or pigeonhole or tokenize those that use ASL. And I think Bobby mentioned texting. Great point, Bobby. Yeah, texting. What will we all do without texting, right? So, but I think that's an excellent point. I'm sure there are some library leaders here. You know, Rhonda brings up a great point, which is that why shouldn't we be creating space for those that speak ASL as a way to include in the regular? Yeah.
Yeah. Bobby said texting. And as far as Deaf Gain, do you know how texting started way back? There was a company called Wintel, and they had a little pager about the size of my hand, the way I was holding it. And they started with that pager, then it became Sidekick, then a BlackBerry, and now iPhone and whatever, Galaxy and all that. Right?
Deaf Gain, yes. And I already see, Rhonda, because of this, we're going to put on our social media some of the great contributions of the deaf community. And I mean, I think it's fantastic. It really is an unspoken, unadvertised contribution to the world, right? What would we do without texting right now?
Right? You don't have to be on the phone all the time, right? I think there was a question in chat asking how I feel about hearing people using ASL in story time. Oh, you had to ask me something challenging, didn't you? Let me be clear. I'm not opposed to hearing people using ASL whatsoever. I want everybody to. I'm all for it. But some things, like if you're not a really good signer, if you haven't been doing it for many years, you're not deeply involved in the community, and then you're doing storytelling in ASL, then you start modeling wrong signs. And when you sign that to deaf children, their brains have to work so hard to understand. And it's not a form of natural acquisition for them to continue to learn and understand. So it's a barrier, just as in the past, signing exact English, SEE, and SIMCOM, signing and talking at the same time, created such effort for deaf people to try to understand what was being said and then translate it into something meaningful in their brains. Young people are not skilled enough yet to do that. Maybe when they get bigger, they start to improve, but it's a real barrier. But it entirely depends. My point is, it entirely depends on the skill level of the signer.
Great. Are there any other questions for Rhonda?
I see one. Is there one more? I see one more.
Yep.
They asked, how can I learn ASL? Because ASL classes are expensive. Learning ASL without a fee, like people who are losing their hearing and so forth, they do have resources like your local parks and rec, depending on where you live as well. If you're in a big city, I don't know where you are, but everybody's from all over on this webinar, but larger cities have a greater chance and less expensive classes. Community colleges sometimes, and they have some online, and Gallaudet also has a program called ASL Connect. And that's courses online. Some are free, depending on why. If you're a parent or you're losing your hearing and have a good reason, it's more likely that you'll get a reasonable price or free lessons. But for students who are simply wanting to learn ASL, there is a charge. Oh, here's another one. When a person is deaf, do they have a hard time finding a job in their own field? Do you have and have difficulty? Do you have any advice? They need to get an advocate and perhaps an advocacy letter from the National Association of the Deaf. Stand up and fight, get people to help, allies as well. Hearing people can become our allies. So, and you could become their allies. You could become allies, but it's not easy, I'll tell you. There are so many deaf people who don't have work. There's one person who said, Oklahoma School for the Deaf has free courses. Yes, I saw that as well. And they left a link in the chat if you want to click on that link.
We have a question in the Q&A forum.
Yeah, I answered the questions in the Q&A, but there's one more that says, if a librarian wants to provide resources for the library so that the deaf community can access them, I suggest going to Gallaudet University's press, Gallaudet University Press. They have a lot of books, and a publisher, Harris Communications, Dawn Sign Press. Look for deaf-owned publishers or Gallaudet. There are a lot of resources there. Many internet sources like YouTube and so forth are good. I mean, have resources, but be careful, because sometimes you'll look at one and they're not even a good signer, and we don't want people seeing that stuff. So you have to be cautious about what you choose to expose yourself or others to. In terms of journals, we have a few deaf-focused journals like Sign Language Studies. There are a variety. You can Google and you'll find quite a number of them.
Rhonda, I also say for the iSchool, we do have a building resource center. And so I would love your opinion and maybe some seminal resources that you'd recommend we include in that resource center for deaf culture and community. So I really appreciate that. And the other,
I'd be delighted. Yes.
and then the other thing is we
I'll
do
have my contact information.
we know where to find you. You know where to find us. The other thing is we have a career counselor. And so one of the questions that I think really resonated with me was the ensuring that we are able to provide that kind of support if we do have a student that is looking for career options. And so I do want to also maybe follow up with you about that to make sure that our career team has those resources so that we can provide the best guidance we can. So.
Yeah. I don't know if you all know, but Gallaudet University has regional centers around the country and outreach. I'm not certain, but many deaf people are able to go to a job that they want through the advocacy that they offer, but not everywhere in America has one of those. It's limited to certain places. And you need to know how to present and frame things to the boss, to the employer, to make them more happy to work with you. And they have some of those resources. Now we have more and more interpreters through VRI, especially for the employment field. Some people can do it right on their phone with an interpreter. So if they need to communicate, they can use that. And many people learn from the deaf person that works with them. Many deaf people are very willing to teach their colleagues a little bit of sign language or a lot.
Excellent. I think the questions continue. So thank you. As you can see, Rhonda, in the Q&A. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we're switching interpreters.
So I think the question in the Q&A, would it be appropriate to add ASL as a section rather than relying on special education sections? This is in terms of libraries.
Right. So, yes. And so one of them say when you frame it with having a different perspective as having people with deaf people as a linguistic minority and not a disability. That's true. For ASL, which place should ASL be presented? Now, it varies. Some places they have it as a communication disorder. So it's under that particular department. And that is whatever, but wow. But most colleges will put it into world languages. At my college, they do that. So it's part of world languages department. And what are we teaching students for? ASL is a foreign language for their requirements and their language requirements. So it is put into world languages. World languages doesn't have a lot of funding though. Not like, medical schools where people go to become doctors, but world languages is where ASL should be because it really does relate to that rather than communication disorders. But then again, there are some people who say, oh no, communication disorders is better because there's more funding there. So I don't know, but most often I think it's better to be in the world languages department. I see one that says the University of Minnesota has ASL under education. Well, it depends on what ASL, like if you have deaf ed, that's appropriate to have it there. But like the University of Virginia doesn't have a deaf ed program or an interpreting program or any of that. So where would you put ASL in education? What would it be there for? So that's why it's a foreign language, so it's in world languages. So it depends on the university and the purpose for the course. Okay, so Beth was asking, what's the best way for deaf to talk with a deaf person if there's no interpreter around? You could do it through writing. You can write notes back and forth. Now, of course, not all deaf people are comfortable with English. There's a lot of language deprivation because from the age of birth to 5, which is the critical window of opportunity to provide language foundation, a lot of the children are missing that. So then when it gets to the point where they try to write, it's not so comfortable. You could try texting back and forth. You could use gestures. Don't ask a deaf person to read your lips or speak for sure, because not all deaf people will want to talk. For me, I was born with the ability to hear and became deaf at the age of 6. I still can speak, but I cannot read lips. And the reason is because I grew up as a very shy girl and I always had my head down and listened. I didn't look at people's mouths. So then when I became deaf, it was like, oh, I have to use my eyes. I have to look, but I missed out on lip reading. Lip reading was foreign to me. It was a struggle. I just couldn't do it. So for me, it was better to try to write to somebody or gesture a little bit, or maybe just learn a few signs. I had a physical therapist who worked on my rotor cuff, my shoulder. And that person did know some signs. And so whatever was important, we were able to communicate about. So there were numbers. He could say 10 times. Great. Or 3 repetitions. Do 10, 10, and 10. So I taught him how to do that. And then he was able to sign exercise or stretch, or does it hurt? And I could say yes or no, just very simple little signs to allow us to communicate. I did have an interpreter that was offered, but he was able to work with me. So if you want to have a deep discussion, yes, an interpreter is good. But sometimes if you just teach a person a few signs, that's helpful.
So Rhonda, not a question, but maybe an invitation for future collaboration. So there are 2 projects that we're working on involving technology. One is the HoloLens 2, which is a mixed reality headset from Microsoft. So one of the things that they have is an application that does some ASL support. And so I'd be very interested in possibly working with you or members of the panel to really fold that into our library technology integration lab, where we're using mixed reality headsets. And I do believe those headsets are going to be in wider use in libraries across the world because you basically have a virtual catalog in the internet with you if you're wearing that headset. So I'd love to reach out to you and maybe again others of the panel, an invitation for collaboration to make sure that ASL is present in that new frontier, if you will. The other is that we've been talking to ALA about a library metaverse, and so the idea of the library metaverse would be to provide librarians with expertise and essentially create an island or a location where librarians and patrons all across the country, really all across the world, could access people or librarians with that expertise. And so that's another invitation as we continue those conversations with ALA. I would like to see an ASL world so that in the case of anyone in the country, again, in the world who needs ASL, hopefully we could go to that place in the virtual world and find support quickly so that again we can serve patrons as needed and as real time as possible. So just again, an invitation to collaborate, and again, I want to make sure the ASL is well represented in that future work. So.
And don't forget, if it is international, every country has their own sign language, which is different from ASL. So we would want to include people from those other countries as well, not just us. But that is a very good idea. I like that. Technology is amazing and it's so important. It's a very important part for deaf people, and it could be very beneficial. It also can have some negative aspects.
Yes.
Sometimes, the inventors are a couple of steps behind. So when new technology finally comes in, then it's like, yes, we have access. And then something new comes along and we can't access that. And then here we are at a couple of steps back again. Like when they invented the phone, it took so many years to finally have access to the phone for us. And Facebook, I will never forget. Facebook Live had people talking without captions, but now there are captions, but live captions, which aren't so great because the voice, sometimes when they listen to what the person's saying, it comes out wrong. They get the wrong words because it sounds like some word, and then, they'll put that phrase in, but it's not correct. For American Sign Language, they're trying to come up with some gloves, but they forget that facial expression is very important in American Sign Language, and the way you move your body is part of the language as well. And so you have all the movements we make, the facial expressions we make, all have purpose. They represent adjectives, adverbs, tense. So everything is there on your face and your body, and not necessarily your hands. So maybe Chat GPT may have later have something in ASL. Maybe there'll be AI in the future that is related to ASL.
Yeah. That's a great point. I mean, there's a project we're working on that is a digital preservation project for the Northern Cheyenne tribe in Montana. And so we were thinking, I wasn't thinking about ASL. So we were thinking about recording someone speaking in the Northern Cheyenne language, including the nonverbals, right? But hadn't even thought about ASL. So that is definitely another point, because really the goal is to preserve the language and culture for generations to come, right? And so we definitely want to make sure that it's accessible to all as we move forward. So yeah, and great point about the American Sign Language. Let's start there. Create a nice space for ASL, and then we'll continue adding on. If this vision comes to fruition, which I believe it's going to. I think, Rhonda, as you said, double-edged sword, but it's certainly a lot of fun experimenting. So,
yes, right. Yes, great idea.
And I think there's a final question. Yeah, and then when we field one more question, and then we'll move on to the panel.
Okay, so one more question. They were asking about dialect. Are they related to different regions? Okay, so now with social media or YouTube, people are able to sign in a more consistent manner throughout the country. Deaf children are not going to schools for the deaf. They go into mainstream programs in public schools. And so their language models are their interpreters. And that's where they learned how to sign, is in those programs. So the signing there is more standardized, not so much regional. But if you are in a school for the deaf, you could be exposed and acquired more regionalized sign language. But the dialects are fading away, and that's sad. I wish that we could, it's very important to have those regional signs, and I really think they're important. In the South, they're much slower in the way they sign, whereas they sign really fast in the North, especially in New York. That's really fast. Or, there are different types of signs. Like, for example, my sign for outside is like this. If you look at other signs, like in Minnesota or Michigan, I think it's like this. They say outside that way. And to me, that sign means boss or coach. So, it kind of have to look at the content to see it means outside. There are some really strange signs that kind of make me kind of wonder. And people, of course, look at our signs and think that they're strange too. Like helicopter, one sign for that is like this. And I talk about, our regional signs are valuable because this could be used to tell a story as a classifier. You can show the helicopter. You have a free hand where you don't have to have one showing the rotors. So it's very good to have a sign like that. So I always kid people that our sign is better than theirs. But, we kind of go back and forth on that. But every area has their own different signs. But in the past, people were in a small group and learned from each other. And then they met different people who had different signs. But the largest percentage of our signs are pretty standardized. There's just a few that are slightly different. Like weight, I do weight this way. It looks like color, but it's weight for us. Cabbage, garbage, they sign different ways. Like, see garbage this way. You can see it in the chat. Outside is because of backpack. Oh, interesting. So it sounded like coach. So, but that, there's so many different signs. But this is fading away. With the older generation, they're using those signs. I want to take the opportunity to video those people signing. Plus, we have Black ASL, and that's more in the South. And that's from the time when they had segregated schools. And it's so important to video those people and their different signs that are so much different from ours. So there's a lot of different things involved in that. Also, Native signs as well, the Native American signs. So yes, it's all over the place, but more and more now with the younger generation, you'll notice that they have much more standardized signing. And regional signs are fading away. I hope they don't go away totally.
Well, great. Thank you so much.
But it's not a challenge, no.
I love the idea. So I grew up in the South, so I have some Southern mannerisms and twangs, and I love the idea of Southern ASL as well. the diversity and uniqueness is incredibly beautiful and fun. So anyway, let's give Rhonda a loud round of applause.
Well, thank you all so much.
Thank you so much. So the next hour we'll be spending with our illustrious panel. So again, I'm going to be turning it over to Beth Wren-Estes, who is a lecturer with the School of Information at San Jose State and also the executive director of the California Library Association. And also wanted to quickly introduce the panel and then turn it over to them. So we have Dr. Bobby Long, who is an assistant professor of School of Library and Information Management at Emporia State University. We have Joan Natural, NTID librarian and DSA liaison at the Wallace Center, Research and Instruction Services at Rochester Institute of Technology. Then we have Danica Rice.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're talking way too fast.
Sorry.
Yeah. I can't keep up with you. Sorry.
Sorry.
Okay. If we can go back to, let's start with Bobby because there was a few things I missed from her.
Got it. Yep. My apologies. Reading from a script. So yes, our first panelist is Dr. Bobby Long. She is an assistant professor of the School of Library and Information Management at Emporia State University. The second panelist is Joan Natural, and she is a NTID librarian and DSA liaison at the Wallace Center. And she is Research and Instruction Services at Rochester Institute of Technology. Our third panelist is Danica Rice. She is the head librarian at the Luce LeBlanc Memorial Library, Springfield, Oregon. And I'll be in Oregon next week, actually. And then finally, Harriet Winterbute, Chair of Acquisitions, Cataloging, Metadata, and E-Resources at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. So again, we thank all of our panelists very much for taking the time to join us. We can't wait to hear what you have to say. And I'm going to hand it over to Beth. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Chow. The way we're going to work today is each of the panelists is going to basically give you a little bit of background about themselves and also share with you about their practice. We're going to start in the order that Dr. Chow just went through. A couple panelists have some slides and others are just speaking. So if you want to ask questions, let's just do it the way we did with the keynote. If you could put the questions into the chat. We'll probably hold the questions until after everyone speaks, just for time. But I'm just going to jump right into it. We're going to start with Dr. Long. So Bobby, I'm just going to turn it over to you and thank you for being here.
Hi, hopefully everyone can see my screen. So I am Dr. Bobby Sarton Long. I am from Emporia State University in Emporia, Kansas. And I am a library science professor there. I teach a lot of different things, but mostly public libraries and children's services. So how I came to study library services for deaf and hard of hearing folks. I was in my former life, I was a social worker, and I became trained in American Sign Language. And so I knew some signs. I've been interested in my life. So as a social worker, I knew a certain set of signs. Then I moved into the library and I learned another set of signs. For a while, I joined an ASL church and I learned a totally different set of signs. So I became a librarian and I became trained in Every Child Ready to Read. For those of you who aren't children's librarians, Every Child Ready to Read is the definitive program for early literacy at public libraries. So even if a public library doesn't use that program, they will use something that's quite strongly based on that program. And I'm going to talk a lot more about that. So I knew a little bit of sign language, and I started communicating with deaf folks who came into the library, and people started asking me questions about how deaf children learn to read. And I realized I didn't know the answers, and the answers weren't readily available in the library science literature. So I thought maybe I should research that. So I went on and got my doctorate, and that became the focus of my studies. And now I teach these things to the children's librarian coming up. So to start, I want to tell you a little bit about Every Child Ready to Read. If you Google that now, this is what they will say. Every child, this implies that it is universal and accessible, doesn't it? That every child must know these things to read. They are pre-literacy skills. So I don't know if you all can see that. Okay, so they are talking, singing, reading, writing, and playing. And when I'm talking to students, I usually say to them, does every child talk? No, not every child talks, or not every child talks in one specific way. So already we can start to dismantle these and see that maybe this isn't as accessible as we think. Maybe it isn't really every child. Now, Every Child Ready to Read, the first edition skills, those are listed here. They are print motivation, print awareness, phonological awareness, narrative skills, vocabulary, and letter knowledge. Now, I'm telling you this for two reasons. One, these were the skills when I was a librarian. And two, using these more technical terms is much more closely tied to the research. So when we look at how does Every Child Ready to Read apply to deaf and hard of hearing children, well, with regards to print motivation means being motivated to read, being excited about books. So does this apply to deaf and hard of hearing children? Well, the research shows, yes, it does, but deaf kiddos may need some accommodation because for lots of reasons, they may have been read to less often than their hearing counterparts. One of those reasons being that quite often in a deaf child's life, only one of their family members learns to sign. And so if they're not getting any other intervention, they can only get language when that one person is available. So what we find, print motivation, yes, but with some modifications perhaps for deaf kiddos. And the research shows particularly interactive books can help with print motivation, books that light up or flash, pop-up books that can help kiddos get excited to read. The next research-tied early literacy skill is print awareness. And that just means being aware of print all around you. And yes, that is exactly the same for kids everywhere. So deaf kids, everybody knows the McDonald's when they see it, and that's the letter M. So that's true for deaf kids, hearing kids, everyone. The next one is phonological awareness. Now that's where the second edition, Every Child Ready to Read, they get singing, right? That we should, and phonological awareness means playing with the parts of words. Now, from what I've read and understood, deaf kiddos are not phonological readers. Some deaf people become people who can sound out words, but that isn't the way that deaf people learn to read. So no, singing, rhyming, this is going to be lost on many deaf kiddos. Now, there are games you can play with classifiers. And for the hearing folks that are here today, if you are not aware of classifiers, there's a great children's book that talks about that called Song for a Whale. But it is a modification, right? So we can say definitively, no, phonological awareness does not translate to deaf kids in the same way that it does for hearing kids. The next skill is narrative skills. So that is just telling and retelling stories. That's why that 3-year-old just tells you the same story over and over again. And you're like, yes, I know. So they're not trying to get on your nerves. That's developmentally appropriate. So when we look at narrative skills, can deaf kiddos develop narrative skills? Yes, but again, we do need a modification. And the reason I think that this happens is because hearing kids are getting information all the time. They're hearing while they're reading the book, while they're doing other things, while they're riding in the car. For deaf kids, their attention is split. So when I read a book to a deaf kid, they're looking at the pictures, they're looking at my hands, they're looking at the pictures again, where the hearing kid has been able to do that simultaneously. So what the research finds is that for narrative skills, deaf kids quite often need more repetitions of books being read to them, which is important, particularly when we talked about how for print motivation, sometimes deaf kids are not read to as much as their hearing peers, especially if they don't also have a hearing parent a deaf parent, a parent who's fluent in ASL to read to them. So the next skill is vocabulary. So vocabulary, is that the same for deaf kids as for hearing kids? Not exactly. So that's one, yes, but we might need modification. And the reason might be for this is because whenever you see someone make a sign, your brain doesn't automatically come up with every synonym for that sign. So whereas with hearing kids, a story time might talk about the different synonyms, we might need to be more intentional with that with deaf kids and not just doing one sign that maybe just means something, one word to a deaf kid, if that makes sense. So again, vocabulary can be modified or can be accessible, but we need modification perhaps. And the last one is letter knowledge. Letter knowledge is exactly the same for hearing and deaf kids. So we know that there's a match in ASL with letters. The alphabet's quite often the first thing people learn, perfect match. No modification needed. So when we look at the research here, you can see the yellow are the places we need modification. And for phonological awareness, it's absolutely not the same. So does Every Child Ready to Read apply to deaf and hard of hearing children? No, it doesn't. It needs some help. So further in my research, I went on to create a model for successful library services for deaf and hard of hearing children. And I may not have time to get through all of this, but if you Google me, I have long lectures about both of these topics: Every Child Ready to Read applying to deaf and hard of hearing children, and the model of successful library services for deaf and hard of hearing children. So when we look at, I conducted some research looking at libraries that were successfully serving deaf and hard of hearing children. How did they start doing that? Here's what I found. There were 4 stages of service. So the first was being warm and welcoming. Seeing differences, not disabilities. We've already kind of talked about that today, that deafness isn't a disability. Taking initiative. And so I'll talk more about that. For stage 2, the impetus was often, there was a staff member that was passionate about this. They encountered a patron who had an unmet need. They might have been partnering with nearby agencies. And then I believe Rhonda talked about this, employing a diverse staff was a real impetus for programming. For stage 3 was accommodations. So as we've talked about with Every Child Ready to Read, making some accommodations for deaf and hard of hearing kiddos, customizing programs, and involving the target audience whenever possible. And then the outcomes of this kind of programming, we're serving the minority culture, educating the majority culture, and building social connections. And I want to be really mindful of time. Beth, I know I had 15 minutes. I'm not really sure. Can I check in with you about if I'm done or do?
No, I think you have 5 more minutes.
5 more minutes. Okay, let me go through some of these real quickly. So the attitudes of librarians. I always tell people this is excellent news because your attitude is free, it's contagious, and it impacts everything. So if you don't do anything else well, just having a good service-minded attitude will get you very far in serving deaf folks. Being aware of service barriers. So always asking ourselves, are there policies that exclude people? Are there barriers? Are there language barriers? What's going on here? And there were some great stories from my research where she was talking about getting the deaf community involved and making sure you explain to them how the library services work. She told a story that we got some deaf folks together. We explained everything's free at the library. So some folks just loaded their backpack up with books, walked out the door. Well, what happens when you take books from the library without checking them out? A light flashed, an alarm went off. They didn't notice. They just kept walking. So just when we're talking to people, making sure that we explain everything thoroughly and that we're making sure that everything is thought through about service barriers. Being warm and welcoming. And we've talked a little bit about that. I always say the basis of librarianship is building rapport with people, just saying hi, getting to know people's names. We've talked already about differences, not disabilities. Deafness is communication, which isn't a disability. That's a quote from my research. Taking initiative. This was so important in libraries that provided outstanding services to deaf folks. Almost every one of them just had a librarian who said, yes, I'll do it. I see a need and I'm going to fill it. And some of them said, I did it even without asking. And then this third quote is really important, I think, when we're librarians thinking about the needs. So she says, that's why I go into the school. These parents are overwhelmed between doctor's appointments and the fact that they just found out their child is deaf and they have speech therapy and 500 other things. The last thing they're thinking about is bringing their deaf kid to the library. So whatever program we have, I'm going to bring it to them. Utilizing staff passion. So this is where I talk about librarians. If you're a manager, get to know things your staff is passionate about. If you have somebody who speaks ASL or they have someone in their lives that they have sort of an in with a certain community, utilize that. Meeting unmet needs. And here's a quote from the research. We are very active in seeking out deaf patrons because we want to make this a first thought for people, that this is the place for lifelong learning. And no matter what your needs are, we will accommodate them. And a lot of libraries talked about how when you do that for one group, the word gets out and other groups will almost come to you and say, hey, we heard you all were doing this for the deaf people. What do you got for us? Partnering for nearby agencies. A lot of the libraries that were doing a great job, they had churches that had ASL services. They would partner with those people, colleges who were training ASL instructors, employers who employed a large amount of deaf people, schools for the deaf. These people can be training, they can be a volunteer source. And also when you're thinking about maybe having a story time, which we were talking about earlier, have the deaf person read the book. Let the hearing person be the interpreter. That's a power shift, right? And that can be so vital in getting your message out to the community. Employing a diverse staff. Research shows people will seek help from someone who they perceive to be like them. So we have to hire all kinds of librarians. There's also some great information about gatekeepers, which really just talks about how you don't have to know all these things yourself. You can just find a person within the community, and then that'll be the door to get you into that community. And that's so important, knowing that I don't have to know everything about this community. Including the target audience. So often librarians will say, we created this program and nobody showed up for it. But when you include the target audience, it ensures that an audience is going to come because they want to come and hear their friends speak. And the great disability slogan, nothing about us without us. So it makes your job easier. It empowers community members. We can ask other people to run programs, and then they will invite their friends. They will serve as that gatekeeper. They know a lot of people that we don't know, and nobody's going to come to a program where they don't perceive I'm an expert. But if I can line up an expert in an area, I'll have much greater success. I think I've taken up my 5 minutes. The last thing I want to say is that serving a minority group, sometimes I think librarians are afraid to do it, but actually the research shows that it's well received by the community. It builds your reputation for being accommodating, that oftentimes more people than you think about are going to use that program. So you might design a program for deaf kiddos, but all kinds of nonverbal kids might come to it. People whose parents who they want their kid to learn a second language, ASL might come to it. So you never know who is going to utilize the program, even if you're designing it for one group in mind. And the last quote from my research is, it's not just their literacy, it's building their social network. So for some people, particularly if you're in a rural area, getting that diagnosis can be of having a kid that's deaf can be a little isolating. So thinking about having the library provide those social supports is a big piece. All right, email me if you have any other questions that I'm not able to answer here. Another note in my slide, I've recently changed my name. So if you see Bobby Bushman, who researches about deaf people, that's also me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bobby. That was so interesting. And I think I could listen to you as a children's youth services person for hours. So thank you so much for that. So I'd like to go right into welcoming Joan Natural. And we're going to get started so we can stay on time. So welcome, Joan.
Okay, thank you. And it's so nice to be here with you, all of you. And so what I'd like to do is explain a little bit about my background first. I am a Gallaudet University graduate. I am deaf myself. My job is at National Institute for the Deaf, of NTID, as a librarian. I work with students who are deaf and interpreting students, as well as teachers who are deaf. And I teach all of them how to use the library and how to find articles and books and videos that they might need. I build up our deaf collections, and we have one of the best collections in the world, or even over Gallaudet, or maybe under Gallaudet. But anyway, there's a large number of large amount of information and guides, and it is in English as well as sign language. We have classes, like where we have deaf women and deaf artists and so forth, to provide support for those kinds of things. We also have a very rich catalog of collections, over 200 collections from the Rochester community. And these are all from alumni. So we're hopeful that we are going to be able to get the ability to digitize some of our collections. We'll get a subscription for that. So we're looking forward to that, and it's an exciting project. So before I got to NTID, I was also a teacher of the deaf. I was a librarian at a school for the deaf. And that's how I got into the field at first. I got my master's in deaf education, and then my second master's was in library science. Today, I would like to talk a little bit about a unique program at NTID. This is something that we've hosted, and it's very exciting. It's the first time that we have hosted this program. It is a huge reading program from Rochester, New York, and it involves the public libraries as well as NTID. Jill Maybury is the chair of the theater department at NTID. And she won an award. And she was so excited to see for the very first time that there was a deaf book chosen. And this book, was written by a deaf person, and it's famous. This person is famous. And currently this person is working at Princeton University. And the name of the book is Deaf Republic. Now, Jill contacted me and asked me to serve as a co-director with her and also with another professor, the Writing Center director, who handles the artwork that was inspired by the book. And so they just asked me to reach out to the public libraries in the area to get them to set up a discussion program. And one of the goals of the award was to increase awareness about NTID theater, and what we offer to the community. So this is very exciting for us. So a little bit about the book. This is about a war that happened at in a fictional country at an unspecified time. I would assume it's East European country. And it just so happened that the soldiers marched in to the town during a puppet show. So they were having a program with a puppet show, and there was a boy there who was deaf and was watching the show. And they were mocking the soldiers, the puppets were, and the boy was laughing. And so they could see his mouth moving. And then what happened was that he, got some saliva and spit at a soldier, and the soldier killed the boy. After that, all the people who could hear in the community decided to make themselves look like they were all deaf, meaning that they signed only and did not communicate with the soldiers through spoken language. So it was very interesting. With this, you look at how language itself has been used as a way to resist. It's a resistance tool for a certain group of people. The author that was here last week and presented his own poetry here at NTID, as well as at the public library. So he kicked off Deaf History Month here at our public library, and that started on April the 1st. I'm trying to get to the next slide. So let me tell you a little bit about what the Big Read is. Oops. Yeah, here we go. All right, so this is a partnership with it's an arts partnership with Arts Midwest that shows the power of the reading experience. So what I have done is I have tried in the library to inform the students about this particular book and then pass it out as a free book to people at the college. I tell them about the play that is happening in April. It's this weekend. So I started that back in the fall to get people accustomed to hearing about it so that they know about the program and get people excited about reading so that they will be ready to watch the play.
Joan, I am sharing the screen. So just let me know when you need me to advance the slide for you.
Oh, okay. Well, then next slide, please. Okay, so what we're doing is we're presenting at the public library. So we've given them some ideas of things that they can do when they host this event. Like, for example, they can have friends of the library purchase books to give away. We have book discussions. We've had them here at NTID and at the public libraries. I've developed an information guide to help them give some starter questions so that they can start those book discussions. We've encouraged artists who were inspired by the book to create some art as examples of the book. We've had creative poetry workshops, poetry readings by local poets. And these poets could be deaf or hard of hearing, or they could be people who could hear. We've also hosted panels with the members of the Rochester Ukraine community, because it seems that the book is pretty relevant to what is going on in the Ukraine during the war now. We've showcased Ukraine and Russian collections. And I happen to have some collections from deaf Russians and deaf Ukrainians. So those are listed in our information guide, as well as we have film showings related to the Ukraine. So these are just some of the ideas that were in our info guide. And this was presented at the Rochester Regional Library Department and also in our county libraries. So it was at a staff meeting there. Next slide. So here you can see an example of the book discussion flyer that we had. And these were teaser questions that might make people curious about the book. We disseminated these flyers through email and social media, as well as posting them at printed versions of them. These questions were, what was the response to oppression in the book? And why is it called Deaf Republic? And were there any images or symbols that stood out for you in the story? When we started these book discussions, we started them in the fall, and then we hosted another one in the spring with the NTID faculty leading that discussion. Next slide, please. So as I said, we had the kickoff at the public library. And at that kickoff, the author read his poetry and signed the books. He also did a book signing here at NTID. We collected artwork that was inspired by the book to then present to, then we were able to show what our poetry, the poetry that was inspired from there at our local public libraries, as well as NTID. The poets are going to be coming this month. For example, we have Eric Epstein, who is going to be doing his ASL poetry here this week. He'll be presenting at the local public library as well here. Also, we've set up a Black Poetry and Black Lives Matter presentation here at RIT. And this is happening in a couple of weeks. We also have a program called Visual Vernacular. And this is a unique type of sign language art performance. And finally, we have John Lee Clark, who is a deaf-blind poet who will be presenting his poetry on how to communicate that was inspired by Braille and protactile communication. So these are types of sign language that deaf-blind people use, as protactile and Braille signing. And this is done among the deaf-blind people who know that language. And we also will have other presenters as well. These are just some of the highlights of the more significant things that are happening right now. Oh, sorry, I didn't even say next slide. Okay, so the Deaf Republic play, taken from the book, will be happening this week on this weekend. We also have a website that has the calendar link of all these events that are available related to the big read. We also have a poster with a QR code. So you can use that QR code. And that has been disseminated to people so that they can use that QR code. Okay, next slide, please. All right. Now, when we were advertising for artists, we started that back in the fall, and the cutoff was January the 15th. And now we're having our exhibits. Anybody was able to send in their artwork, and especially art that was 6 by 6 inch. And this was part of, these were auctioned off as a fundraiser for Ukrainian people. Our art exhibit here was focused on deaf artists. And next slide, please. I just wanted to explain a little bit about the sign that is related. It's a flag that, so you can see here, it's a sign related flag, and it comes from France. And it's from a deaf artist called Jean Arnaud Ballard. So you can see the 5 hand shape here. So that's what happens when the flag waves. It looks just like somebody waving or signing. So you can see the hand waving in the air. So we will have postings in the chat. There's other slides I wanted to share that that has children's stories in a variety of different signed languages from different countries. So this is a project that was developed by the NTID Deaf Instructional Department. So I do want to share that link. It's called World Around You. And then there's another link that I wanted to share that I really liked. It was from the California School for the Deaf. They have a video where the children tell stories in sign language. And I also wanted to share some of the English second language materials that have been developed in our library. And then we do that using the Oxford Bookworm and Penguin readers. So if you wait for just a moment, I'll go ahead and post those links in the chat.
And just to let you know, we're going to have to move on in a few seconds. So just a time check.
Okay. All right. So go ahead and feel free to contact me for any more information that you want. And we have a wealth of resources that we can share with you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Joan. That was wonderful. Sorry to have rushed you. Trying to fit 4 panelists in is challenging. I'm going to go right into Dr. Danica Rice, and I think you'll enjoy her remarks as well. And we are trying to fit all of our remaining panelists in. I know we have a hard stop at 1 p.m., but I'd like to get the last 2 panelists in if we can. So thank you. And so Danica, here you go.
Hi. My name is Danica. Hold on one second. I have to turn off the sound. Well, I'll turn it off this way. I can hear, and sometimes it's difficult for me to hear myself talking. But anyway, putting that aside, hello, everyone. I would like to introduce myself. My name is Danica Rice. I'm a graduate from San Jose State University in 2017. And I have a lot in common with many of you. I thought I would share some of my experiences about my experiences at San Jose. That was the first time I took an entirely online course, and as a deaf person. It was super beneficial to have the additional technology available. At that time, they only had captioning, but it was always accessible and aware. And I had the good fortune of going through several different libraries in terms of work. Today, I don't work as a librarian, but I'm presently in the process of starting my own library. A friend of mine's family passed away, and in their website, they invited me to set up a memorial library in honor of that individual who passed away. She was very, very enthusiastic about advocacy and social justice in every form. And I became really passionate about making her dream come true, to make it possible to continue and bring it to the world of deaf people in the form of a library. I always wanted to set up a library of my own because I noticed that so many libraries out there, I'll tell you, there are political and bureaucratic issues involved in the library system, right? And so when I went through the experience in a variety of places, I saw a lot of things that helped me realize that it would be better for me to focus on what I value the most, and that is serving people with disabilities. And in that process, part of that population are people who are deaf. So I'm a specialist for a company called Garton Services in Oregon. And that's my day job. My evening job is the library, Luce LeBlanc Memorial Library. My experience at San Jose, I would say that I had been highly recommended courses. I believe it was called a course. I believe it was called, I don't remember now, but it was a long time ago. But the teacher was Virginia Tucker, and she taught, I think it was a course number 202. And that course, I don't know if it still exists and if it's still ongoing, but if you have a chance to take it, I highly recommend it because it will help you understand the taxonomy and the structure of the databases. And it gave me so much support and knowledge going forward and being able to organize things and structure them. Cataloging. I took Mary Boland's course. She taught me everything I know about cataloging. And then I proceeded to move on from there. And so my recommendation is that if you're able to keep a record of everything that you've done, keep a record, because you'll need everything that you've done so far in your world for your e-portfolio. And I'm a little bit all over the place, but I also wanted to let you know that there is a deaf library specifically for and about deaf people. We're working on making it more active. And I'm really, really motivated about having and excited about having people join us if there's any interest. And I'm enjoying the process, and I've enjoyed this presentation. I feel like everyone is saying things that need to be known, need to be heard, if you know what I mean. But a few things I might add. Remember to provide equipment that deaf people might need. Provide interpreters and captions for your devices, and make sure that the TV screens are available. And best of all, I always say, even the littlest tiny bit of sign language helps so much. So much. It makes such a huge difference. If you know just the alphabet, that's fine. And then make sure everybody learns the alphabet. That's even better. Or even better than that, hire a deaf person on your staff. Like Rhonda said, it's very difficult to find librarian jobs for deaf people today. I'm living proof of that. I've been through a number of experiences, but for one reason or another, they ended, or I had to move on. So now, if y'all are hiring or making hiring decisions, give deaf people credit. Consider how you can change your library by make the world a better place. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Danica. Truth is what you just told. So I'd like to introduce our last panelist, Harriet Wintermuth. And Harriet, if you want to take the stage, I'll hand it over to you.
You're muted.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so I do want to thank you all for arranging this and inviting everyone to come. And I appreciate all the previous panelists and all their comments and all their support. And I'll avoid repeating anything they all have said. So let me tell you about who I am. I was born deaf. I also have visual loss and so on. I have other disabilities. I grew up in a mainstream public school. I always have had interpreters and used interpreters. My undergraduate work was in computer science. And the way I got into the library field really was, it was kind of a one-off. It was unexpected because as I was growing up, I just loved reading. I was always in a book. I never looked at myself as a librarian. I loved going to the library, but I didn't see myself as being somebody who would interact with the public. And so that was just not my style. So I didn't think I would become a librarian. But I also am a knitter and a crocheter. So I joined a website for knitters. It's called Ravelry. And so I became a volunteer editor for their database about their patterns that they have and the yarn and all of that. And so through that, I learned the type of informational science that specifically metadata, which I call MD. And so I realized that that was what I was fascinated in. And I wanted to go into that field. So then I went into school to become a librarian. And then what I do is work with metadata and cataloging. And I've always worked in an academic library since that point. The libraries, I include FAC with faculty with no tenure. At other schools in universities, the librarians are not faculty. They're professional staff. And they also include third-year type of faculty with tenure. So I just started my new job right now, just this last Monday. So I'm the chair of accounting, metadata, and ER. So I'm very excited. This is a brand new opportunity for me. And it does have tenure. So I have had the faculty vote me in as an associate professor. So this is an upgrade for me, and this is or a promotion. I know Dr. Boland because she was my first boss when I was working here back in 2014 through 2019. Then I left and then I came back. So I went to UNL and then I came back. So now let me talk about some topics and some how-tos from my experience. So most of the time, what I've seen is the how-tos is, making bad assumptions, being forgetful. So this is a true story. There was one place where I was working, and that floor where I was working only had a single bathroom, which meant that there were no stalls. So you would go in and you'd lock the door, but people didn't understand why the door was locked. They thought that possibly it was broken, but no, it was actually me. I was in the bathroom. Sure. And they forget that deaf people use the bathroom too. So nobody responded when they knocked. So sometimes they make bad assumptions thinking, well, it's just too hard for you. And I say, no, I can do it. So that same old thing all the time. And my advice really quickly is to ask. Please just spell it out. Ask, what are your preferences? As was said before, don't assume somebody can read lips. Don't say, please lip read. Ask the preference of the person. Do they prefer to do it through emails? Do they prefer to write? Do they prefer to text? How do they prefer to communicate? Everybody has different ways of communicating. Accommodate a person's needs too. That's a wide variety of accommodations that people might need. So just keep the communication open. Other advice is be flexible. Sometimes things are restricted. There might not be an interpreter available. So maybe you have to switch to Zoom or maybe move your meeting or whatever you're doing to a different time and day. That's fine. So that's my big advice for people who are working with people who are deaf or maybe faculty or staff or whoever. Maybe you have patrons who are coming in to this is my major advice for you for working with these people. So thank you so much again for all the comments that I've heard so far. And again, I just want to give you my appreciation. Thank you. Okay, that's it.
Thank you, Harriet. Thank you to all the panelists, and I'm going to turn it back to Dr. Chow.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate everybody's respectful use of time, incredible amount of information and wisdom put forth in such a short period of time. So let's again give all of our panelists in our keynote a loud round of applause. Great job. Thank you so much for contributing to all of our knowledge and expertise in this area. I also want to thank our world-class staff. So Alfredo Alcantar, he's always in the background, but Alfredo, we couldn't do it without you. So thank you as always. Vivian Zuo, who is our events coordinator, who many of you probably corresponded via email. Yori Tokunaga, our tireless EDI student writer. Nicole Purviance, our marketing director. Perla Marquez, our social media assistant. Sonia Velasco, our social media and UX coordinator. And finally, but certainly not least, Dale David, who will be editing and posting the recording to YouTube. And again, I just wanted to reiterate that in supporting equity, diversity, and inclusion, it's critical that we go beyond just supporting it, but actually putting into action our time and resources. As you can tell, that long list of individuals, including all of the wonderful people in front of you on the screen now, just goes to show how much time and effort it really takes to make space to have these important conversations. So again, thank you for joining us. The full transcript, recording, and summary of today's proceedings will be posted within the next few weeks. And Alfredo, if you could drop the two addresses there. Again, they'll be posted there. Also, they'll be posted in our YouTube channel, specific for equity, diversity, and inclusion. And finally, we have three really exciting symposiums coming up. So on April 22nd, hosted by Loida Garcia-Febo, will be our Earth Day celebration. The Asian Pacific American Heritage Month on May 26th, hosted by Apala. And then our Juneteenth Day on June 20th, hosted by Benny Wilkins. So again, thank you so much for taking your time, for for joining us. All of the panelists and Rhonda, again, you're invited to continue the conversation offline. We'd love to collaborate with you in a lot of various projects, grants, etc. So again, thank you so much for joining us and have a wonderful day.